Welcome back to the channel. Quick video for you today on installing new subframe bushings in a second-gen Camaro, specifically my 81. So these bushings will typically go bad just from sitting over time. They're rubber from the factory, so they will deteriorate as the car sits and over the years just accumulating wear and tear. So the units that I'm replacing are going to be solid aluminum. They're from UMI Performance. Part number is 2664. And it's a full set of bushings, so there's 6 total sets of bushings on the front end of this car to replace in the subframe area. And I'll be replacing 4 of those. I'm going to leave the radiator core support bushings as rubber, help isolate some vibrations from the radiator. So real quick, I'm going to show you exactly where these bushings are located, and we'll start getting into exactly how you change them out. So here we go. Alright, so your first bushing for the radiator core support is going to be located right here. As you can see, it's right next to your radiator. That's the bushing I'm going to be leaving as rubber, and that will hopefully help isolate some vibrations from the radiator instead of going to a solid aluminum setup like I'm going on the other locations. So that's your first location you can change out, and we'll move on to the other 2 that are underneath the car. Alright guys, so as you can see, for your second and third position, it's going to be underneath the car. Your second position for bushings, first that's going to be underneath the car, is going to be right behind your front wheel wells. And as you can see, we roll up under the car. First location is going to be right there. That's going to be just behind, as you can see, the inner fender for the front wheels. And if you move on back towards the tail end of the subframe, you will see you get to a point and a cutout, and that's your third bushing on one side that can be replaced. Like I said, I will be doing these 2, but I will not be doing the front one to attempt to isolate some vibrations from the radiator. So we'll jump into kind of how I have things set up right now and get into the procedures that the instructions tell you to do when you're replacing these bushings. So let's go. Alright folks, so this is how I have the car set up right now to put these subframe bushings in. Jacked up on the center crossmember under the motor, put 2 jack stands, 1 on each side on the front A-arms. It's kind of important because what you're going to wind up doing is you're actually going to wind up either taking this floor jack or a second floor jack, and you're going to literally separate the body from the subframe just enough to get the bushings in and out, of course. But to do that, you got to make sure that obviously the subframe is supported and you have the ability to jack up on the pinch welds on the side of the body to actually lift the body itself off the subframe just enough to get your bushings in and out. So I'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute, but let's move on. Alright, so real quick, should have mentioned this before, but before you jack the car up, go ahead and take the battery out. You're going to need to access the radiator core support bushing bolt that is underneath the battery, and I'll show you exactly where that is. So that's the bolt you got to access that's underneath the battery, and basically what you're going to want to do is go underneath the car, in the car, and loosen all 6 of the bolts that hold those bushings in place. Do not pull them out, but loosen them up. And at that point, you're going to basically pick a side to start on, pull those bolts out, and start putting new bushings in. So the way you have to do that is, obviously, like I said, make sure you have the subframe supported, and then what you're going to have to do is get like a 2x4, or if you have the correct tools to do it, what you need to jack the body up off the subframe by the pinch welds on the unibody construction. So I'll show you what that looks like for those of us that don't have necessarily the best tools in the world, but I got enough to make it work. Alright folks, so this is how this jack and board situation kind of looks. Like I said, it would be ideal if I had a groove in the board for it to actually slide into the pinch weld and hold on to, but working with what we got. So as you can see, as we jack the board up, we should see some separation between the body and the subframe. Which we do. So, alright. Now we get to see exactly how much further we got to go. Like I said, you just want to jack the body up enough to get the bushing in and out, and after that, jacking it up anymore does no good besides just getting it up higher. So, key thing real quick as well, when you're looking at this board as you start to jack it up, pay attention. If that board wants to kind of fall one way or the other, in towards the car, out towards the car, you need to reposition the jack and the board. Obviously you want the board centered up on the jack as best you can, but if the board starts to fall one way or the other, That will kind of tell you whether or not you need to go further under the car or back out of the car. And like I said, if I had a groove cut in the board, this would eliminate, or that would eliminate, a lot of problems and help keep the board where it needs to be. So just keep that in mind as you're doing this, if you're doing it my way. Like I said, this is definitely not the best, but this is a way to get it done if this is all you have available. So, on to the next step. Alright, so as you can see, we've got separation. This is enough space for us to get in here, get that old bushing out of the top, which is obviously where your clearance issues are going to lie if you don't have it jacked up enough. So make sure you jack it up enough to get your hands in there and get the bushing out through the top. These are two-piece bushings, of course. So the back one's not usually bad. It wasn't on the other side because you got plenty of space back here as it wants to separate. Up there near the firewall, however, I'll tell you, you're going to need to jack the car up a little bit more than you'd expect. Just because if you have it supported like I do up there, it doesn't want to separate as much. So my advice to you on the front one is, once you get the car and the body jacked up and you think you have enough space, or you have enough space, try to push it out the front towards the wheel well. That seems to have worked out the best for me, just by the way everything separates and the way the angles kind of play into things. So that's my tip for that. Whether that be right or wrong, that's what worked for me. But we'll get in here and get these new bushings installed, and I'll catch y'all in just a minute. Alright, one more tip along the way. So as you go to reinstall these bushings and put the subframe back up in place, you may have to shift off of your pinch weld and put the jack on the back end of the subframe to get it back flush with the floorboard to put your bolt back in. That's what I did, and at this point you're ready to start torquing things down. And like I said, you work this one side at a time until all your bushings are in. Then once all your bushings are in, that's when you can go back and torque everything down. I would start with the back subframe bolts. I don't know that it really matters, but that's where I'm going to start. Torque specs on these is between 70 and 90 foot-pounds, so I'll be shooting for 80 is what I'll be putting on these. So like I said, torque this side, go back to the other side, torque the rear bolts on it, and once those two are tight, I'll just go back and do the front two, and those are also 70 to 90 foot-pounds. So that covers the basics, and I'll do a recap at the end just to kind of go back over everything to make sure I didn't miss anything, and hopefully you'll have the same success I did getting these things in here, and you'll notice an improvement. I'll show you exactly what these bushings look like real quick when I pulled them out. So that's what's left of one of them. As you can see, it's quite deteriorated. Lots of rust, lots of other not so good things in the metal parts. So going with solid aluminum to hopefully stiffen everything up, along with subframe connectors. Alright, so here's the finished product on one side. I do stand corrected. Instructions call for 100 foot-pounds on positions 2 and 3 and 70 foot-pounds on position 1, which is up there at the radiator core support. So that's the rearmost bushing that's been replaced. And here's the front one that's been replaced near the firewall. Alrighty folks, so thank you for checking out the video today. If it was helpful, definitely let me know, leave a like, a comment. If there's something I can improve on, please let me know that as well. Hope to help you guys as best I can, hopefully share my learning experiences along the way. Which, speaking of, we do have to go over. Alright, so as I was editing that last clip and editing this video, I realized that there was never an explanation as to what the big learning experience was for this little project that we had. So I used an impact on the subframe bushing bolts, and I broke 2 of the captive nuts in the car loose. So for those that may not know, there is a nut for each of those bolts, obviously, that is held in place by a bracket. The back one is on the inside of the car underneath the seat, and the front one, or the one under the firewall, is just held in place in a cage of sorts. But both of them have nuts that are held in by a sheet metal bracket that is tack welded to the piece that it is attached to. So what happened when I used that impact, and with all the other crap that was holding the nut and bolt together, when I used the impact, it busted those cages loose and the nuts started to free spin. So my father-in-law had to come up here and help me get that sorted out. He wound up welding the cage back in place in both locations on the driver's side. The passenger side was fine. And the lesson there is don't be afraid to use some penetrating oil or lubricant to try to get those threads to free up. And if you can help it, don't use an impact on stuff like that, just for the simple fact that all the road grime and rust and corrosion has probably seized those bolts and nuts together a little bit tighter than they were meant to be. So just keep that in mind as you go through and do your project. But anyways, I appreciate y'all making it this far in the video. If you have, like I said in the outro there, if you have any suggestions for me, any positive feedback, constructive criticism, whatever, I'm here for it. So just let me know what you think in the comments below. Throw it a like, throw a subscribe, whatever you feel like doing. I certainly appreciate it. Y'all have a good one.